Please join me in welcoming from Equitable Life, Brent Swatuk, advanced case consultant. For the past 23 years, Brent has been making an impact, helping advisors increase their knowledge of insurance products, the art of questioning clients, solving problems, and how to present solutions more effectively. He has held a number of roles in the industry and has earned the following designations: CHS, CLU, CPCA, and EPC. His topic today: I'll just buy another unit and they can sell that to pay the taxes. Please join me in welcoming our friend, Brent Swatuk. Brent?
Well, thank you, Greg. Appreciate that warm introduction. And wow, following Frank, that's a tough one. So I'm very, very pleased. Frank, I was excited. I loved your talk. So congratulations, brother. So the title is, It's Okay, I'll Just Buy Another Property and They Can Sell That and Pay the Estate Tax. And really what we're going to do is explore liquidity solutions for real estate investors. And much like Frank, I get a lot of cases that come across my desk and a lot of excited people when they meet these folks, and for good reason. I mean, hey, they've got great wealth, but there is a finesse and there's certain things that we're going to need to do. And so what I'm going to do with this presentation today, it is a much larger presentation that we've kind of carved out some of the ideas that work with these folks. And it'll deal kind of at a macro level. We won't jump into whether they're holding it in personal name or corporate name and what that means in that. But what we're going to do is we'll take you through a bunch of solutions and kind of some of the topical things that you might want to know when you come across these real estate investors. So how often have you heard a prospect who's active in real estate say, it's okay, I'll just buy another property, and when I die, they can sell that and pay the estate taxes, right? And understand, when they're saying estate taxes, that's really kind of a US term, right? That has migrated up here to Canada. Up here, we know when we say estate taxes, they're talking about capital gains taxes, right? They're talking about probate fees or estate administration fees, but they're probably going to know it as they often see it referenced in books and on YouTube and everything else as estate taxes. So we'll play with their terminology, but we need to understand that when they're saying estate taxes, they're probably talking about deferred capital gains taxes. The first thing that we advisors have to understand is a client doesn't need life insurance to pay estate taxes, right? A client does not need life insurance to pay the estate tax. What they need is liquidity, right? They need cash, right? The tax comes in. I don't need life insurance to settle that bill. What I need is to turn over a pile of cash to them. But what's true with real estate investors, as we would say with business owners, is many of these folks grossly overestimate the amount of liquidity that actually exists in their portfolio or their businesses, right? These are folks that are constantly on the offensive of creating wealth and building, and they're not really thinking of the liquidity that's going to be needed to play that defensive role in their life. The objective of this presentation is going to be to explore some solutions to the liquidity problems that many of these real estate investors are going to face upon their death, or that many may not know about is coming on their death. And so I want to start this a little bit maybe differently than what I would start most of my presentations. I'm going to start it with 3 words and their definitions. And I read you the word, you can read the definition on your own because I think you're capable of that. So the first one is problem, right? And so we have to know that there's a problem, which is something that they need to overcome, right? The second one is perpetuation, right? So something that continues indefinitely. And the last one is solution, meaning solving of that problem, right? Or that difficult situation. And the source is Oxford Dictionary, just in case that you're wondering where that came from. And so what I would invite you to is, as we go through this presentation, try and remember problem, perpetuation, or solution, right? Meaning that what is the problem? Is the client perpetuating the problem, or are they solving the problem with what they're proposing, right? And how can the problem be solved? And I want to give kudos. This has been an amazing 2 days. But yesterday we had two talks in general that said the importance of picking a target market. And you're going to see some of that kind of resonate through the beginning of this presentation. But it's important for you to really know if real estate investors are your target, you need to really understand their problems, their ideologies, like what they typically do, and the problem with these things and how we can solve that, right? And so as we go through, think of problem, perpetuation, and solution, right? Strategies for building wealth. And we know that there's three places historically where people have built massive wealth. Number one is building a business or multiple businesses for those serial entrepreneurs. We're not going to talk about that today. The second is investing in real estate, right? We all have heard the line, they're not building any more land. And the last one is the stock market, which we're, once again, not going to talk about today. What we're really going to focus in on is real estate, right? Those folks that are investing in real estate and building their empires with real estate. And as I said, there's a lot of these folks out there. You can't go on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook without people saying how they're building wealth. It's important that you can lift the veil though and see how they're doing it and have an understanding. So that way, when you connect with these people, you can offer massive value to them. So I guess the real question is, how do you sell life insurance to a real estate investor? And the answer is to go deep, right? To really understand your client. And it speaks to what Frank was talking about. It's not about walking in with a concept, but it's about really getting into the mindset of your clients, which speaks to the target market stuff from yesterday, right? Understanding what are their common goals? What are the common blind spots and pitfalls that they hit? What's the strategy that they're using? And believe me, we're going to touch strategy in a second, but you really need to know their strategy. And I get a lot of calls for this stuff, and I start asking, how are they, like, what is their strategy? How are they dealing with this? And a lot of times there's crickets on the other side of the phone. So we want to make sure that we really understand who we're sitting in front of, what their unique ability is, what their troubles are, and really what their goals are long-term, right? And they may be, the goals long-term thing is a bit of a tough one. They'll probably tell you about a lot of the acquisition stuff they want to do, but they may not be thinking where we want them to think, which is that transition of stuff, right? But before you approach them, you have to really, really know what they value. Because if you're approaching them from what you value, which is selling them, cash value life insurance or term insurance or UL or whatever it is, you're going to be met. It's like butting your head against the wall, right? You don't want to hit that friction. You want to swim downstream with these folks. And you want to know what is their real estate strategy. And we're going to dive into that right now. So you got to do that homework, right? Are they into single family dwelling, right? Do they put in basement apartments? Are they into multifamily dwellings? Do they buy apartments? Are they into commercial real estate? Are they into retail? Now you might say, well, who cares? But I'll tell you that in dealing with each one of these types of investors, their mindset is different, right? And depending on whether they're emerging high net worth or they are multi-generational, where this stuff has been passed down and they've been taught the stewardship on how to run these things, that's going to be different too. So you need to have the backstory, and you need to know, well, why is it that you like commercial over single family dwelling? Like why do you do that over one or another? So you need to have an understanding of what it is they own, why it is they prefer it, because they may have a game plan for that. The next thing you need to know is, what's their strategy? Is it buy and hold? Is it buy and flip? Is it buy, fix, rip down and flip, right? You need to have this, because a lot of times when folks will reach out, they'll say, I've got this guy, he's got 20 properties. We need to get together with him. He's rich and he needs insurance. And I say, great. So tell me about his properties. Like, how long has he owned them? What does he intend to do with them? I don't know. Does he buy and hold? Is he buy and flip? I don't know. Well, why would I want to know that? Well, if his game is buy and flip, then chances are he's paying his taxes as he goes along. And it may not be capital gains taxes. they may have determined that this is his business and this may be business income. If it's buy and hold, we've got to know what it is he's bought. What's the fair market value? How do we think that's going to appreciate over time? And then from there, we can determine what's the potential tax liability and how do we settle that. But we have to have an understanding of this. Are they buying in Canada? Are they buying in the US? If they are, you may need some US tax advice on that. So it's very important that you're drilling down to understand exactly what it is they're doing and not just take it at face value of, oh, they do real estate, they must be rich, and they should probably own a ton of life insurance. I'm not disputing they probably should. I'm just saying the more we know about them, the more we know how they'll purchase and own that insurance. Are they a solo investor, right? Do they buy only with themselves because they've been burnt in the past? Do they buy in partnership? Do they buy in investor clubs? So, if they buy in partnership, do they have a shareholders agreement, or a partnership agreement between them, right? Sorry, not shares, because we're not the owner of shares, but unless it's a corporation. But are they buying in partnership? So, I have, my best friend and I might buy a property, but what happens if I die? He may not like my wife and vice versa. So we need basically a prenup on the property that we bought that says how things are going to go. If they're a solo investor, we might be looking at, okay, if they're buy and hold and you want to pass the farm and the cows to the kids to keep milking them, then we probably should have some form of liquidity in the form of insurance in there. If it's an investor club, it could be, what are the terms to that? So if I pass away, does my wife have disbursements she has to keep up on? Can she get out of it? What are the rules to getting out of it, right? So you want to dig down and see the details of things. Are they all cash? Are they leveraged? Believe it or not, I have come across a number of really wealthy families that do developing, but they're all cash developers. They don't like leverage. And then if you read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, they're going to tell you to leverage as much as you can, right? So you've got to understand where they're getting their info from. And I would say that when you're dealing with these real estate folks, especially with kind of the new age emerging, you're going to want to read books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad. You're going to want to read the books they're reading because you want to be in the mindset of where they're getting their info. So I'm going to give you idea number one at this time. And it's a simple idea, right? And it's called the term bank. And so for clients that are in that acquisition stage from, usually ages 30 to 50s, and I know, by the way, that you don't want to hear this, but this is a great time for you to build up your term bank of high value, low cost, convertible term insurance, right? And you want to do this because if you're trying to take large sums of money off the table to go towards permanent cash value life insurance, that may not come across so well for them. But you're going to want to have this term bank because at some point, they may want to pass that business on. So they should buy, I'm not saying they shouldn't buy permanent life insurance, right? They probably should. But at this stage, the fact that they're acquiring real estate, and that's really where their value system is going to be rooted in, permanent cash value life insurance may not sit well with them because they want to keep throwing the real estate touchdowns, right? They want to acquire the next building. This is the majority of the time. So if you're sitting uneasy and thinking, that guy's a moron, I sold permanent life, I'm not saying you haven't, and I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm just saying the majority of time, they're not going to want to tie their money up into something that can't be put into cash value life insurance. And thank you, Frank, for saying what an IFA was, but no, it's not. The IFA is not usually a right fit here. And just in case you're typing that in the chat right now, or you're raising your hand or pacing that you think it is, using collateral at this phase for non-real estate ventures is probably not going to be that attractive to these clients. So if they're using up some of their collateral capacity, they want that to go into a property, or as they would deem it, a door, right? They call them doors. So if you're watching things online and you hear somebody say, I've got 10 doors, they're talking about 10 properties, right? So they want that collateral being used in something that's going to appreciate in value, have the ability to be refinanced, and create recurring revenue, right? That pays down the mortgages. An IFA, however, might fit later in the life cycle. So think of somebody in their late 50s and 60s where they've got enough doors, right? They've got enough properties acquired, and they're more focused on conserving versus acquisition. So they're looking at, how do I conserve these buildings, pass that on to the kids so they can keep milking the cash cows? And at that time, this is where that term bank comes in handy, right? So a big pile of term that can be converted to a product, like be it term 100, UL, or whole life, might be the right move at that time. Heck, an IFA might be the right move at that time, right? Because they might still be acquiring, but they're like, hey, we're going to need some insurance, so we'd like to see that structure. But you have to understand the real estate investor's life cycle. So just like they were talking about target marketing, what you got to realize is, just like in business, there's a startup phase or a developing phase or an acquisition phase, right? There's a growth phase and a mature phase. And how we think in each one of those various stages of the life cycle, it's going to be very different, right? And if you understand how people think in those phases and typical moves they make and the problems and blind spots, and you merge your ecosystem with the other professionals that are going to need to be there to add real value to these clients, man, you can build an amazing business with these folks. But you've got to understand the stages that they're going to go through. And you've got to think Rockefellers or Rothschilds and not Vanderbilts, right? We want to build something that's there to last. Now, if somebody says, hey, I'm going to acquire a whole bunch of real estate and then I'm going to sell it before I retire, which is weird. I've never seen anybody say that, but then maybe they don't need to buy life insurance in that. But if they're looking at building generational wealth, then at some point they're going to consider permanent life insurance. Hopefully, they have the health. If they do not help you in building that term bank, hopefully they maintain their health. And as we know, people will trade their health for that wealth. So having that low cost, high value convertible term insurance is going to come in big time handy at this time. So let's take a look at an example. And as I said, this might seem a bit sliced up and disjointed, and that's because this is part of a much bigger presentation. But we want to give you a bunch of nuggets here that you can take away and maybe try and implement some things with them. So the term bank, you're probably sitting back saying, okay, that's not something I would have come up with my own self, right? Like I could have come up with that. Hopefully you get a few nuggets out of the next couple examples and ideas that we're going to share. The 8 property guy is loosely based on a case that I worked at my previous employer. So this is going back a couple. And I say loosely because I'd love to tell you the exact way that the dialogue went down, but I didn't get these gray hairs by dying them in. I got them over time, right? So there's been a lot of conversations in between. So I'm going to do my best to try and set the stage of what I remember. And I was working with an advisor who was absolutely a pro at dealing with real estate investors. And so I'm gonna share some ideas. Unfortunately, that guy has passed on, but I'm gonna share some of the ideas that we went through, and I thought they were just great. I've never seen anybody present like this before. So we have a client, male 50, he's been acquiring properties for about 15 years. He's a buy and hold strategist. He wants to eventually pass those properties on to his kids. This particular gentleman was no longer married. So this creates an issue, right? Like if he passes away, we've got tax to pay now, but we know at some point we've got tax to pay if he never marries again in the future, right? On that first death, because we know the CRA is going to come in the day before he died and value those properties, right? We'll touch on that in a second. What our client needs to understand is the full process and cost associated with transferring these assets to his kids. And it's amazing the weird advice that's out there, right? And I can remember this guy what sparked the conversation with this guy. Like first, our broker had met him. They had some great conversation. He's like, I'm going to transfer these properties to a trust at some point, so that way I don't have to pay the taxes. And if anybody understands trust, you know why that's really not a good idea. And well, it could be a good idea, but you know that it's going to result in some taxes payable on that day. So, it's amazing the amount of misinformation that's out there. So we got to let people tell us what their goals are with things, but we've got to let them tell us what they're thinking, right? Like how this is going to roll and go down. And so 3.2, we did some rough math, and it looks like 3.2 million is what's going to be needed at 85 when our client should expire, right? And we get 85 by asking. I'm like, how old are your parents? How long do you think you live? What's your health like? Blah, blah, blah. So we came up with 3.2 million at 85. Advisor asked, what plans do you have in place to pay the final taxes? And it's like, you've probably encountered this a ton. I try not to think about that, right? Because this guy's trying to throw touchdowns. He's trying to acquire. And his whole thing is they're going to get the properties. What they do with them is up to them. Like, I started out with nothing, and they're going to start out much further ahead than where I am. We as advisors sit back and kind of laugh because we're like, hey, you got a big job of teaching your kids how to run this empire, and you got to keep acquiring. So that's a big job that he's got ahead of him. But this is a very typical answer, right, that we might get from someone, because they're thinking about the offense of their acquisition. They're not thinking about playing defense, right? And that's where we want to get their heads at. And so if you know anything about sports, you know that offense is the opposite of defense. And so we've got to find a way to make that work in concert and cohesively with the way they're thinking and what they want to achieve. And it's funny, I remember when I was going through a lot of this stuff and working with business owners, Anthony Robbins has a saying, the right strategy could save you a decade of your life. I love this saying, right? It basically says that if you know somebody that's achieved what you want to achieve, if you go out and look at their habits and you look at their moves and you study them, you might not have to have a decade of struggle going on there. And I heard this saying, and it made total sense to me as an individual, but I'll tell you, my head tracked this over to life insurance, right? And working with these real estate investors and business clients. And so now you might be saying, how do we apply that to life insurance? But I got to tell you first, you got to learn what happens to real estate empires that lack liquidity, because it's really expensive to turn bricks and steel back into cash, right? And by the way, if you want to dig deeper in this, if you don't have your CLU, great place to start. If you want to learn more about estates and what goes on, go do the Certified Executor Advisor, right? The CEA. These things will not hurt you. They will help you in pushing this forward. But why does that saying by Anthony Robbins track into life insurance and the fact that it's expensive to move bricks and steel back into cash? Well, the right strategy could save you a decade of your wealth that you're going to build, right? You see, it says insert name, but I'd really like it if you use your client's name there, right? So you see, Mr. Client, when you spend the average of 30 years acquiring these assets, on the day that you walk out the door and you don't walk back in it, the CRA is going to walk back in and they're going to be looking to take on average 1/3 of your estate, right? And they're going to call that estate taxes. So, Mr. Client, if you knew that the last 10 years of your hard work acquiring this empire would be taken and wiped out in the name of tax, would you still do it? Now, here's the thing. They've built habits to do it. They don't know anything else, right? That's what excites them. So of course they're still going to do it. But here's the claim, right? If we could design a way to cut the CRA out for less and keep more of the empire in the family, would that be of interest to you? So the right strategy could save you a decade of your wealth, right? We don't want to wipe out one decade. And here's where we get into idea number 2, right? Which is exploring those liquidity solutions, right? Because they're going to come in looking for that money and we've got to have that money there. And so we're going to call this next one the uninsured sale, because you're going to sell every option with insurance maybe being the last one, but you're going to expose every option. So if we had a male age 85 that needed $3.2 million and he was 50 today, what are the options we could do? Well, he could give us his money and we could put it into a sinking fund. By the way, this is called our alternative funding scenarios, right? We have this calculator that does this. And so what it says is, hey, if you could do a sinking fund at 4%, so if we could go out and get you a 4% bond somewhere, and you gave us $184,000 a year for 10 years, when you drop dead at 85, your kids can come rolling in. We're going to give them $3.2 million. They pay off the CRA. They keep the 8 properties intact. Not bad, but he's not going to be excited for this because his money's moving in interest income one direction. Whereas where he's got his money now, he's getting rental, refinance, and growth, right? Even though he may not like this, he might say, well, what if I just gave you all the money up front? So instead of 1.8 million over 10 years, he gives us 1.7 up front. He drops that at 85. We hand over $3.2 million, right? Once again, interest income, probably not liking this deal. The next option is what we're going to call the ostrich or the bank loan, right? Which is don't do anything, right? Your kids can just take the properties, leverage them at the bank. Banks never have credit issues. They'll always just give money, right? But that aside, tongue in cheek, right? If they could borrow the money at 5% and then pay that back over 10 years, they're going to borrow $3.2 million on that day, and they're going to pay back almost $4.2 million. So imagine what that's going to do to the cash flow from these properties. It's pretty much going to suck it all up. And it's an expensive option, right? Because now you're not paying 1.8 million, you're paying the full 3.2 plus the juice, right? So it's an expensive option. You'll notice that there's an option 3 here that says sell assets, and you notice there's not an option 3 here that says sell assets. And that's because selling assets is a wild card. You're typically going to be selling assets for pennies on the dollar. Because if we went to, if my spouse had to sell a building and she was under duress, people would start the bidding on that building at 40 cents just to see what she would take. And depending on how much pain there is, she might let it go for that. But on average, you're going to sell that thing from 40 to maybe 80 cents on the dollar. And, this is an unheard of market. If you're selling today, maybe you get 100 cents. That'd be great. It would still be a loss because people are selling at such a multiple today. But typically selling assets under duress is a bad option. The last option is we could take 90 grand a year for 10 years, 900,000, put it into a policy. Here we're using our Equitable wealth accumulator. This could have been T100, folks, by the way, right? But we're doing Equimax T100, or the wealth accumulator, sorry, paid age 100, offset in 10. And I'm going to show you the reason why in a couple slides. But here, I'm going to put in 900 grand. This is on current dividend scale. We could run this at -1, -2, whatever you like. It's just an example, folks, right? But here we got 900 grand going in. When you pass away at 85, we'll have 3.2 going to your heirs. They pay off the CRA. Easy done, right? And what we get here is cash value building. So we're not giving up liquidity use control of that money. We're going to see that in a second. So the uninsured sale. What are all the different ways you can pay this? And life insurance is the last option. And remember, money pays premium, health buys insurance, right? So if you can't get it, then we go back to the other options. Those are the other options you have, right? And if you don't remember anything that I just spouted out on this, just remember this: little bars are really good and big bars aren't so good, right? So that's a nice, easy way to boil that one down. I like simple too. So they could sell the assets and pay the tax. That's what the original idea was, right? So Mr. 8 property guy, if we were to take your properties right now and line them up 1 through 8, 1 being the best asset, 8 being the worst asset, which of your properties would be number 1? And you do this exercise. I'm going to show you in a second. This was the guy's exercise, by the way. Mr. Klein, if you passed away last night and this morning the Canada Revenue Agency showed up looking for $3.2 million in estate administration and capital gains taxes, or estate taxes as he'll know it, based on that, if they showed up, and assuming I was here this morning with your kids and the plan was to sell some of those assets like you told them to, and then they could keep the balance and earn the money on those, my $3.2 million question for you is, which one should they sell? And so here we've got the assets lined up 1 through 8. And here's what he thinks they should sell, right? The worst one, 6, 7, and 8. But here's what the reality is. It's a whole lot easier to probably liquidate under duress 1, 2, and 3. They're the more marketable. They're the ones expected to get the higher rents and get the better increases. So he might think 6, 7, and 8, but he's no longer here. He doesn't sell them. The kids might have to sell 1, 2, and 3 to get this job done. Here's a couple other questions, right? Do you have life insurance? No, life insurance is a bad investment. Well, we happen to think that investments make for bad life insurance as well. So humor me if you can, Mr. Klein. If you had some permanent life insurance in your portfolio worth $3.2 million, and you passed away last night, we lined up the properties and put the life insurance at the end, which would you rather the CRA take? It's number 9 every time. Your life insurance investment could save the other 8 investments you currently own. Some other questions that you can review later. When we look at that cash value life insurance, realize that it builds a cash value, right? This can be used for vacancies, fixing up properties, and everything else. It's not a dead asset in our balance sheet. We're running out of time, so IFA is going to have to be handled on another day, folks. But understand, we've got some follow-up training coming on PAR and IFAs this year for you. And as a bonus, because I know I got to wrap up because we're on our time. Tomorrow I'm going to post on LinkedIn a cool idea called "How 4 Cows Help Sell a $7 Million Policy." It's by an industry legend. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you're going to see it. If not, I recommend give me a follow, give me a connection, and I'm happy to share this idea with you. And I want to thank you for your time today.
All right. Brent, thank you very much. A lot of good information there, and thank you for sharing.